Our God of creation, we thank you so much for the Sabbath, for the Sabbath which you have given to us as a symbol of restoration. Thank you for this special time to consider some things that help us in our process of restoration. We can see your work of restoration over history through these time periods that we can explore together. We ask that you do restore us, continue to do that work amongst us, and help this movement to continue to do that work. We thank you for prophecy, and we ask for understanding where we need understanding. We ask you to help us to understand equality and also the complicated world events, especially as we can see a very complicated world around us, and we see the same kind of complicated world history in the time period. So we ask your blessing upon this service. Please give me your words to speak, help all the minds and all the ears of all the hearers as well to be able to absorb and remember these things. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Okay, I'm hoping everybody can hear me okay. It's the first time I'm trying these earphones, but just let me know if there's any problems or delays or anything. I've been having a few delays sometimes with people. The light is reflecting off my board a bit, isn't it? So I'm not sure, but not sure I can do much about that. There's been a big rainstorm and I had to put the lights on. But anyway, let's have a quick look at the Millerite waymarks first, and then we'll get into looking at some of the external history that happened in that time period. So, because it's a bit hard to read, that's 1798 there, and 1840, this would be the major line here. 1850 is the Midway Sunday Law waymark there. 1861 is their close of probation. 1863, the Second Advent, and Civil War there. 1863 is actually midway through that war. Then for the first group called 1798 there, Miller's increase of knowledge is formalisation, 1840. Then we have the middle waymark here in July 1844. October 1844 would be lining up with our November 9, 2019, and also the cross in the line of the end of ancient Israel. We have the Mexican War giving us the two minor waymarks there, 1846 and 1848. And then there's only one group called from the church in their case, so at 1850 they then go to the world. So Elder Tess had given some studies in PG, so it's really appropriate, given all that music and everything. This is a Fijian theme as well. And so if you want to revise these, they're done in more depth in those studies that were done in Fiji in 2020. I'm going to just focus on Henry Clay, his lifetime, whereas she covered a little bit longer time history. So we're going to focus on Henry Clay today. In his lifetime, there was 3 elections that are of significance. You might notice that all these waymarks line up with important internal waymarks as well. So 1840, 1844, you can combine those, they're both 1844. There was a big election that year, and in 1848, so every 4 years they had one, 1848. Those 3 elections I'm going to look at today because that's during Henry Clay's lifetime. But Elder Tess did also say there's another important one, the 1860 election, just before their close probation. But I won't be covering that today. So I've just put +1 in brackets here so that we don't make the mistake of thinking there's only 3 important ones. There's actually 4. I put the word compromises here because each election involved some compromises on the part of Henry Clay and the Whig Party. The Whig Party, I should also explain, this is part of the time period where we didn't have Republican versus Democrats. We had what was a precursor to the Republican Party was the Whig Party. Whig Party was begun here in 1833 and it ended, it basically fell apart sometime here, and it fell into pieces, and out of part of that developed the Republican Party. We had Abraham Lincoln and all of that coming out of that. So when I'm talking about the Whig Party, they become the Republican Party. But in this history, they're the good guys. They represent the better ideals, the anti-slavery ideals. And then the Democrats are actually the bad guys, the inverted commas, if we're just going to simplify it down. So it may seem a little confusing if I use the word Democrats, but most of the time we'll be talking about the Whigs if you just think of them as the people that we would consider the better of the two options. Also keeping in mind that in this history, even though they're anti-slavery, they're not necessarily anti-slavery for the right reasons. They're kind of centrists, most of them, being an abolitionist. Like one that was really anti-racist was quite rare and considered really extreme in this time period. So Henry Clay and others, I think Henry Clay was a slave owner, and there were others, but they didn't necessarily want slavery for many reasons. They could be economic reasons, worries about what, population growth of Black people in the country would do, many other reasons that they didn't want to have slavery, and they didn't want to abolish it necessarily suddenly. A lot of them just wanted to gradually sort of phase it out over time, so they weren't in a particular hurry. So just keep that in mind too. Okay, so we had 3 elections we'll look at. I've tried to keep that simple so it can help us maybe remember. We had 3 compromises as well during this history. Some of the shaded bits because there's a time period there, but there's 1, 2, 3, and we will talk about each one and label it as we go. Down here I've got Henry Clay personally, so his lifetime, and I've just put a dot there for just to show his involvement is actually, he's personally involved in each of these waymark. If we were to draw like we do sometimes, threading of, these lines, we can thread Henry Clay through each waymark, all the minor ones and major ones, at least till, he dies actually here. That's when he dies in 1852. So he's significant because we can see he's active at each, as something internally is happening here, really important. Something externally is happening here with Henry Clay, and Henry Clay is not representing, we don't apply that to a single individual in our history, but it just does represent, a bigger subject, a broader subject than just pointing out one particular Democrat or something like that. So that's that. I'm going to share screen. So we're going to do a little bit of share screen and backwards and forwards throughout the study, so I can show you some pictures and all of that. So I'll just open up my share screen. Okay, I'm hoping everybody can see that. Please sing out if you can't. All right, Henry Clay. So it's just the title page. All right. So does anybody know? And this can be interactive. I welcome people to unmute and interact. I'll see if I don't see the chats coming up, maybe somebody can sing out. I'm not sure if they're going to pop up while I'm on share screen. But does anybody know which president pushed through their Sunday law? Well, first of all, actually, what was the Millerites' Sunday law? What do we mark at 1850? Does anybody remember?
Is it the charts?
The charts. So would we call, our formalised message the Sunday law? We mark the charts at 1850, but externally, did they have an actual Sunday law? Was there a law against Sunday in their history?
I think it was called the Slave.
Could you say that again, Marie? Sorry.
I think it was called the Slave Act. The law.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the longer name is the Fugitive Slave Act, and it's part of the 1850 Compromise. So that's something that we mark there. So the Fugitive Slave Act was passed in 1850. Now, does anybody happen to know which president pushed it through and signed it? Does anybody want to volunteer? We're going to learn by the end.
Abraham Lincoln.
No, not Abraham Lincoln. Any other guesses?
Johnson.
No, we want to find out who's responsible for this. But no, it's neither of those. Good try. Any other guesses? hopefully by the end, everybody will know who it is. We can put a face to that. So here's some faces that we're going to be talking about today. Does anybody happen to recognise any of these people from, your own study? Perhaps you've looked into this history yourself. I know some of us from our local fellowship have done this study with me. We didn't finish it, but we started it. And we did go through these faces, and I wonder if anybody can remember any of them.
Polk.
Oh, I can see the chat now. I've got that up. Poke, who's at that?
Me, Josephine.
Josephine. Hi, Josephine. Which number is Poke?
I may be wrong, but is that 4?
Yes, he's number 4. Very good. And thank you, Oni. You can recognise Poke as well. All right. Does anybody else recognise any other famous faces? I like putting faces to names, so I'm a bit of a visual person. So once I get to know the people, I find it easier a little bit to understand the history. Josephine?
Adams.
Adams? Yes. Which one is that one?
Oh, this is where I'm gonna.
You know, no, not 11. And there's 2 John Adams. There's like one that was a president, and another one was a president later. The one you're talking about is John Quincy Adams. He's in this history. We're going to talk about these people today. He's number 3. John Quincy Adams is number 3.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And this isn't a judging test. This is just a little game because by the end, hopefully we'll be able to, put some names to faces and find out which of these are good guys and bad guys. When we simplify, I know it's an oversimplification to call people good and bad, but we're going to do that a little bit today. So, all right. Well, in here we also have some famous. Well, there's Henry Clay. Does anybody know which one is Henry Clay? He's our main character today. Any guesses?
Just have a guess.
Yeah, okay, Brendan. Zachary Taylor is 6. Yes, correct. And Jefferson 11, correct. Yes, good job, Brendan. Yep, so nobody knows who Henry Clay is, or nobody wants to have a guess?
How about 2?
Great. Did you say 2?
Yeah.
If you did? Yeah, you're right. That's number 2. All right, that'll do for the little game. All right, let's move on. Okay, that's all their names. I'll label them for you. So John C. Calhoun, yeah, his face, yeah, it suits his nature. Henry Clay, number 2, John Quincy Adams, 3, James Polk, a very important person we will learn about, very relevant to 1844, a key turning point in history. Winfield Scott is more of a minor character. Zachary Taylor is important. He becomes a president. John Tyler is very important. He's the vice president, but he gets into power. William Harrison also is voted in as president at some point. Millard Fillmore is a vice president at a certain point. He's important. Martin Van Buren is just somebody that they were fighting against, so not a really significant person. Thomas Jefferson, I've got in here because he is somebody who identified quite early on that a civil war may be, a consequence of the compromises that were going on. So he could just see that there was problems ahead. So we just have a quote from him, that's all for today. And Stephen Douglas is also important when we're talking about the Compromise of 1850. He had a role in that. So there's a little bit of a preview. Okay, so I'll just go to the next slide. Okay, so anybody want to think about the 1850 Compromise? So this is what we're calling the Sunday Law or the Fugitive Slave Act. If you had to guess, who do you think wrote it and who do you think signed it, just out of the 2 parties? So Whigs would be the good guys. I've got good guys there in a picture, and Democrats would be the bad guys. Who would you expect to have written the 1850 Compromise? If you didn't perhaps know any better, who would you think?
Democrats.
Yeah, that's right. Who would? But in actual fact, it was both wigs in both cases. So this is why it's important to realise that, you know, it's not as simple as all of that. They had different motives for doing what they did, and we will look into that. Okay, so let's begin with 1798. This is the first waymark in our line for the beginning of modern Israel. So we had important internal events, obviously. That's the time at the end. We have some quotes I've just popped in there. I probably don't think we need to read them in full, certainly not the first two, but I will just talk about them briefly. We have 3 clauses in the Constitution that are problematic. So right from the beginning, there's problems. The 3/5 compromise is in Article 1, Section 2, and it's Clause 3 there. And I've just highlighted in red, there's a mention of free persons on one hand, and contrasted with 3/5, let's just ignore that bit, but it's contrasted with all other persons, not free persons. Okay, so you can see here we're talking about free people and not free people, and obviously the way that they're calculating the representatives for the House of Representatives. This is a compromise to actually prevent the slave states from getting too much power, but it does sort of make it sound like a coloured person is worth 3/5 of a white person. That's how it ends up sounding, although the motives for doing that were actually better motives that were promoted by the northern states. But we see here also a word that they're not using, can't we? They're calling them all other persons. They're sort of pussyfooting around it, I think, a little bit, and not saying things very straightforward. We know they mean slaves. The second clause of interest is about the importation of slaves. So again, they're talking about these are some wheeling and dealing to get unity, to get a federation happening. You've got a board, say, of representing each state. You've got to get everybody to sign this thing. So they're making some concessions to the slave holding states to get basically to create a union. So here they're making a concession here as well, that there's not going to be some interventions there on the importation of such persons. Such persons, again, we're talking about slaves there. And the third one, could I ask for a volunteer? Perhaps Ray, would you mind reading the Fugitive Slave Law out? Because this is, I think, important.
Sure. No person held to service or labour in one state under the laws thereof, escaping into another, shall in consequence of any law or regulation therein be discharged from such service or labour, but shall be delivered up on the claim of the party to whom such service or labour may be due.
Thanks, Ray. So this is really important. This is here right from the start. This is going to create a problem throughout this whole history. This whole idea of slaves escaping to free states and then being returned to slaveholding states. And that's actually written in there right from the start. So you can see there that there's been some compromises already from the get-go. All right, so I did also put in a couple of quotes about, they did debate using the word slave. There was different people arguing either way. I've got there Governor Morris of Pennsylvania. He was really angry about this, and he said, you should say, put it in there, the importation of slaves into North Carolina, South Carolina and Georgia, and he named and shamed them. He wanted that in there because he was angry. But then you had Connecticut's Roger Sherman. He was like, oh no, I prefer a description better than those terms proposed because they're not pleasing to some people. So let's not use the word slave, it's displeasing to some people. So, and then you had some of the Southerners, they also said the word slave is not mentioned because the Northern delegates, owing to their particular scruples on the subject of slavery, did not choose the word slave to be mentioned. And so that's how the Southerners avoided the term, because they didn't want to antagonise their colleagues from the North. So they sort of said, okay, we won't call them slaves, to sort of like, we don't want to, we have more chances of passing this through if we don't use the word slave in there. So the Southerners were also okay to not use the word slave help their cause. The Constitution, okay, so we're looking at how it was compromised, but we also have to keep in mind, is the Constitution good or bad? We have a quote from Ellen White here. I've highlighted some key words. The United States, the lamb-like horns, it's indicating the horns indicating the youth, innocence and gentleness. We're talking about it coming up in 1798, founding on civil and religious liberty, and the Declaration of Independence stating that all men are created equal and endowed with the inalienable right to life, liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Here she mentions the Constitution. The Constitution guarantees to the people the right of self-government, providing that representatives elected by the popular vote shall enact and administer laws. So you can see here that it's given a very positive light. Elder Terry, you mentioned this when we did this in our local fellowship. I was wondering whether you could comment on this again, about how we can consider the Constitution. She's not there. What she did say was that if we can recall, Elder Tess had mentioned Barack Obama's speech and how he had said the Constitution was like the North Star, or it had the North Star embedded in it, and it was meant to grow and develop over time and be amended and develop. Another thing that Elder Tess had said is that the Constitution was written in the time of darkness. So if we looked at our timeline, anything before 1798 was a time of darkness. Same with the institution of the United States. It was a time of darkness when this Constitution was written. So that was just sort of, it was necessary in order to make the Union, make the United States. However, just like the Adventist movement was meant to come out of that darkness and then grow and to learn about God's character and, you know, the higher constitution, that would be the, you know, Constitution of Heaven, for example. So likewise, the United States was also meant to improve over time and make, you know, amendments and, you know, come more into line with righteousness, I suppose. So we can see here that the Constitution was compromised at the beginning, but they did have a responsibility to you know, reform over time and bring it more equality and all of that. They were responsible for getting rid of slavery. Okay, so I might just stop the screen share for a sec, and we'll just write that up on the board. So 1798, we can put the Constitution. Right, and we can see that there's seeds in there that are going to, because they're not managed well, they end up creating a civil war and they come to their full fruition. All right, maybe I'll just go back to the share screen again, because that's all I was going to write about that. All right, so next waymark we have 1818 is William Miller's increase of knowledge. So we mark that on the internal line. But meanwhile, externally, we have pretty significant events going on. I have put a picture of Henry Clay here because this is where we really see him. Oh, the other thing I was going to mention about 1798, I'll put it on the board now without stopping the screen share. Henry Clay did his first speech, his first political speech. He actually can mark him right from the first waymark, which is important. And his speech was, you know, such a success that they carried him and his companion out, cheering him on. So he was really popular. It was, I can't remember the subject, but it was similar. Forgotten the name of it. So yeah, you can mark Henry Clay at 1798 as well. Anyway, moving on. He's not super famous yet, but you can see here that he ends up being today considered by many historians the greatest senator in US history. That he's actually seen really positively. So we're going to be looking at him somewhat negatively, but people that credit him with saving the Union and all of that and finding ways of keeping the country together through these compromises call him all kinds of positive things. So I just put one quote. There was a few different quotes that Elder Tess gave, but one was, greatest senator in US history. However, we're looking at him a little differently. And in 1818 to 1820, we have something called the Missouri Compromise. So today I just want to maybe help explain a little bit about the Missouri Compromise so that you can understand how this is related. All of this ties into 1861 is their close of probation and the beginning of the Civil War. So they have up till basically then to deal with all this stuff, but in the end, it ends up creating all these deaths and punishment. But to get there, there was a process. It didn't just come out of the blue. It began bit by bit and step by step. They managed to get themselves into a real problem. So in 1818, okay, so this diagram here, we've got the United States as it looked at that time. So the red coloured areas are owned by, like other countries like Spain or whatever, different colonial countries. The blue area there is, at that stage, I'm not sure whether it was still natives or, I think they end up purchasing some of that. Louisiana purchased, but at this point, I can't remember. The dark green states along the top part, this is, so all the green ones, they're the Union as it was. Okay, that's how many sort of states that they had. The darker green at the top representing, non-slave holding states, and the southern ones in the lighter shade of green are slave holding states. The way that they had their numbers calculated to be represented in Congress, at the moment, at this point in time, it's an even split. There's a sort of a balance of power between the two parties. And the two sides are disagreeing about other things as well. So this is sort of like a fairly finely tuned balance, but and sort of chugging along. But what happens is this one coloured in white is Missouri. They have settlements of people, American, I guess people have settled those areas, and now they want to actually join the Union as like an official state. So that's in Missouri, and they've applied to join. What ends up happening, because of the people in Missouri, they want to be a slave state. This creates a problem, because if they can join the Union, then they will add more representatives to government, and they will tip the power balance in favour of the slaveholding states. So there's immediately, as soon as they apply, it's almost like everybody reveals their colours. It splits along this line, this ideological line, and now you have like an impasse. When this happens, it does alert some people that we have a problem here. The country is actually quite divided ideologically, and so that's sort of where we find ourselves when we end up coming to this Missouri Compromise. Obviously, it's Missouri because it's about the state of Missouri. So they argue about this. I won't go into more detail on that. That's probably all I need to do. But as luck has it, I guess, for them, Maine is right up the top there, and they're like, yeah, we would like to join the Union as well. So now it's like, okay, maybe there's a solution we can find here. And Henry Clay's like, comes up with basically an idea, and they're going to let Maine join as a free state, and Missouri can join as a slave state. Fair for everybody. We can sort of kick the can down a little bit further down the road and keep the Union together. So save the Union. So he does this, and he also has this idea of the 3630 line there. So the parallel line. So they're just coordinates on the map. See that it lines up. So they've coloured in now. Maine here, you can see now is coloured in the dark green, and the Missouri is now coloured in the lighter green. This line lines up with the bottom of the Missouri state. That's why it's chosen there. See the this area now, which I mentioned before, is the Louisiana Purchase thing. They have purchased it now. So up the top there, all this white area, it's all above the 3630 line. This would all, according to this compromise, all of that white area would become free. And that little blue area under the 3630 line would become slave, state. So you can see here that this looks like a really big win for the North, because they're going to get lots of space there for their, it looks like they'll have the balance of power because they get all that land, whereas that small little area. Why would the South accept such a deal when they only get such a small part and the North gets such a big part? So does anybody have any idea why southern states would actually think this is, in any way going to be good for them? Well, I'll go ahead and yeah. Someone's unmuted. Could you say that again? It was a bit blurry.
They probably need assurances like something like a Fugitive Slave Act.
They will later. They will. But at this point, actually, they have the Fugitive Slave Clause in the Constitution still. But I think there was already some issues with that, because when Missouri wanted to join, they kind of were discussing this. The North didn't necessarily want to actually do that slave act deal. But anyway, there was all kinds of arguments. I'll tell you why that. At least one historian that I listened to said that they probably thought that this was going to work well for them in the long run. And that's because they're thinking about Texas expansion already. So in the southern states, you have, they're kind of outgrowing their land. They've sort of used up a lot of their resources, and then they really want to go into new fertile areas. So they're kind of looking towards this western expansion already, got their sights set on some of this land. They're like, okay, well, if that line kind of keeps going across, the next bit of land we get, we're going to get some of this area here. So they're kind of like, yeah, let's say okay to this deal. So there's Missouri Compromise goes through. So here's a quote about Clay there. So I'll read it. Therefore, adroitly sidestepping the partisans of both sections, Clay manoeuvred this legislation through the House and greased its way through a joint House-Senate Reconciliation Committee to the desk of President James Monroe, who signed it on March 6, 1820. So that's why we mark 1818 to 1820, signed in 1820 after all this discussion. This Missouri Compromise made the reputation of Henry Clay as a national reconciler, as a champion and statesman not only of state or a section, but of the Union. I think he's a hero because he's not sectional, he's intellect, let's have unity, he sounded like the good guy. So that's all celebrated. Okay, so we'll just put that up on the board. It's an orange one because that's compromise. Yeah, so here we have 1820, and that's the Missouri. And so I put a dot here as well. Henry Clay's obviously involved in that. That's basically his idea. So next, we're going to look at the next waymark is going to be 1833, and that's another compromise one that. Oh yeah, just before we move on. So here's the quotes as well about, I've just highlighted the red, I think just to save time. Thomas Jefferson had said, this momentous question was like a fire bell in the night. It awakened and filled me with terror, and I considered it the knell of the Union. You can just see the ideologies and the mentalities of everybody. It's just so, polarized, that this whole thing just really revealed to him the problem here. And also John Quincy Adams, who plays, you know, a pretty good role in this whole history. He also saw this as a mere preamble, a title page to a great tragic volume, and how accurate that statement ends up being now that we know and can look back. 1833, the Tariff Compromise. So basically in this one, we have John C. Calhoun on the left and Henry Clay on the right. Henry Clay is from the Whigs and John C. Calhoun is a Democrat. There's an issue with tariffs, and the problem is that the states in the north, they're manufacturing states, so they have industries and things like that. That's how they make their money. The southern states depend on basically slavery, and they have agriculture as their main export, whatever, income generation. So when the northern states want to sell their products and they want to improve, you know, the competition situation with imports coming in from England, they put a tariff on imports. That means that they can sell their own homemade, American-made products more easily. There's less competition for that. That helps them. However, in the South, they don't benefit from that so much. In fact, they import a lot of goods for their agriculture, and so it harms them. They're not happy. John C. Calhoun goes around raising up all this sort of agitation, and then they start to threaten, we're going to secede the Union because we take this as a personal attack. And John C. Calhoun also explicitly says, this isn't the actual, this isn't the cause, this is the effect. The cause of this is the differences in the way we are choosing to do our industry and our work. So basically, he brings in slavery into the equation, says this is, you know, it's an effect of the differences between us, and they took it quite offensively, and so they threatened to secede. So there's this huge threat of the Union falling apart, and it's a big deal. And so big hero comes along, of course. Our hero Henry Clay comes along, actually makes it works together with Calhoun, sort of like a bipartisan thing. Let's save the Union, let's keep it all together, let's write this tariff compromise. And so they make some agreements to like gradually reduce the tariffs over time. So he makes some concessions, but you can see Henry Clay at work there in that waymark, 1833. The waymark where William Miller, his message is, you know, it's a formalisation for him where he gets his credentials. So we can see that important external events are happening at the same time. Also at this point, I will mention there's also a gag rule. Picture on the bottom left there, that's James Polk. Now, he's going to be important in the election in 1844, but in 1836 we can see him as well. 1836 is not one of the waymarks here, but it's going to be a time period that goes all the way through to 1844. What's happening in the United States at this time is there are abolitionists that really they're called the immediatists. They want to get rid of slavery immediately, and they actually, somebody was bankrolling this thing, promoting it. They were printing newsletters, they were door knocking, they were going everywhere, getting people to sign petitions and bombard the Congress with letters and their members, and to petition and petition and petition. They were getting all these signatures and just, you know, really putting the pressure on in government. But the men in government, not necessarily being, you know, anti-racist, you know, they have other agendas that they feel are more important, and this is a big interruption to them, and they're kind of just finding it frustrating, and they don't want to deal with all these people, these extreme immediatist abolitionists, and all their crazy concerns about slavery. So they kind of just say, let's make this gag rule, and we're going to resolve. So this is across the boards, like more or less a mostly bipartisan thing. We're going to do this. So I've got the quote there at the bottom. So it says, resolved that all petitions, memorials, resolutions, propositions, or papers relating in any way or to any extent whatsoever to the subject of slavery or the abolition of slavery shall, without being either printed or referred, be laid on the table. And basically at the end, no further action whatever shall be had thereon. We're just not going to deal with these. We're just going to refuse to deal with them. And this is our standing policy. It's actually formally written in. John Quincy Adams really hates this. He's the guy we just saw earlier, and he keeps, every time a new Congress comes, he tries to repeal this over and over and over again, but he never has success until finally in 1844 it is. So I'll just put both of those things on the board. Tariff Compromise. So he received Henry Clegg and working with Calhoun, and then the GAD will it's from here all the way through here. You can't write to your members, or you could try, but they're not going to really read it. You can try to say, you know, agitate this slavery issue, but they're basically going to ignore you, which is quite bad. So that's the gag rule. Okay, now we're into an election because we've hit the 1840, 1844 and 1848, the three elections that are 4 years apart, 3 in a row, all important. We can see compromises here because we see the Whig Party. Well, 1833 as well is also a little month here. It is when the Whig Party was also formed. So that's also important. Okay, so 1840. So they've got a Whig Party now. Up till then, they, you know, different people would just run. I think, I don't know, but certainly there was no like two-party system like that. It was a bit more open. So 1840, we have. Okay, I've got the picture here of Winfield Scott. The reason his picture is here, he doesn't actually become one of the candidates, but he may have. What he did is he wrote a letter that was expressing sympathy for abolitionists. He wasn't really an abolitionist as such, but whatever he wrote there made him look like, you know, he could be accused of it. And they thought that since they're enemies, the Democrats would probably accuse him of being an abolitionist. He's probably not going to win the election. So if we want to win the election, we've got to choose somebody else, somebody considered maybe more of a centrist or something. This guy is a bit too risky. So that just shows their mentality there, that they wanted to pick somebody that less of an abolitionist so that they can get through and win. This will be the first time they hope to win. And in fact, they do. So who ends up running is William H. Harrison. He ends up becoming the president, and he's a centrist. And to try to get votes from Southerners, they choose a vice president who is a Southern slave owner, John Tyler. They don't expect him to have much power because that role didn't really give him much power as a vice president. Of course, they didn't expect William Harrison to die 1 month later. We'll talk about that in a sec. And John Tyler ends up becoming the president, which is a total disaster. This is their campaign, a little bit about their campaign. The picture on the right there, Martin Van Buren, that's the guy that they were running against. They tried to make out that William Harrison was like a man of the people, you know, your everyday guy that lives in a log cabin. They had a song about him, they had slogans, and you know, big campaign to promote him. It worked really well. He won by a landslide. They would have been really cheering and having a big party. Of course, 1 month is not very long for Harrison to be powerful. They thought that they would have like an anti-slavery president, but they ended up with John Tyler after all. So it was something they should have learned from. Okay, so there we go. The description there of Harrison dying after 1 month. And as soon as John Tyler gets in there, he undoes the agenda of the Whig Party, all the bills that they were trying to put through. He just basically ignores, scraps them. He's not really a Whig at heart. And then the real problem that ends up creating, you know, contributing to this problem that leads to the Civil War is John Tyler starts, raising this idea about the Texas question, and that makes it obviously coming more to the forefront, becoming a bigger issue. So I'll just stop there and hold that up. So that's the election. Harrison. President. He dies, and he gets it. And they end up kicking him out of the Whig Party, or people from his cabinet resign. It's all kind of, they did disown John Tyler for what he did. Yeah. And so he continues on for 4 years. Right. Okay, 1844 election. Elder Tess had given a quote from the book about 1844, and it had a quote about what William Miller had said about this when he was asked about, what are your thoughts on the 1844 election? William Miller said, oh, well, an important revolution will take place before long, which will supersede the necessity of choosing a president by ballot, for the King of Kings will soon be inaugurated into the chair of state. So William Miller's eyes were on the Second Advent, and he wasn't obviously really seeing the significance of these external events, especially this 1844 election, which was pivotal, really, really pivotal, because of what ends up, because it's all got to do with this expansion across from, into the West. As soon as you start expanding into the West, you start having more areas of land, and then you've got to deal with, what are we going to do? Are we going to have slave states or free states? And it just sort of builds and builds and builds this pressure. So in the 1844 election, we actually have Henry Clay actually runs this time, and he's running against James Polk. James Polk we saw earlier. And so you should recognise his picture here. We have a photograph of a painting, a famous painting. Many would recognise that. That's Manifest Destiny. There she is, heading westward. You can see all the people travelling across. It's all very optimistic. They're bringing their technologies with them. She's carrying her telegraph wire in her arms. They're going to bring, all their great technologies across, improve those, barbaric-y kind of, areas, and they're going to bring their steam trains and all of this stuff with them, and they're going to prosper. And it's manifest. Manifest means it's obvious or it's clear. It's our destiny, from sea to shining sea. So that's this, it's this huge build-up of expectation in the population. There's a lot of enthusiasm for this. And so this is the environment where this 1844 election comes in. So the candidates are now in this environment. Henry Clay, so he's always sort of wanted to he was a gradualist. He wanted to get rid of slavery, but he also wants to win the election. So he writes in a letter when he was interviewed, I think, in the Southern newspaper, that he didn't have a personal objection to the annexation of the Republic of Texas. But when he wrote that, hoping to win some, Southern support, it's a disaster for him, because the supporters in the North that are really anti-slavery see this as like, he's selling out. So they're not happy with him. And also this campaign does not actually take a strong stance against slavery. And so because he's done this, and because they've kind of compromised in this way, trying to get, popular support and all of that, it ends up splitting the vote for the Whigs. Some of the people that would have voted Whigs end up voting for others, third options. And the results of the election were pretty close. He loses by a small margin. So if he hadn't have lost the support of those others in the North, they would have got over the line, because you can see that, because it was a narrow margin. So unfortunately, Henry Clay lost the election, and that puts James Polk. James Polk was the guy with the gag, So he's a southerner, very strong southerner. Now, Polk's really important. He's actually really successful in his, he wants to do this westward expansion. Let's go for it. And he does it really, really well. It all works out, like as a big success for Polk. And so that's why 1844 creates such a problem, because they do succeed in spreading all, opening up all these territories. They have their war with Mexico and all of that, which we will discuss. When the 1844 election was going on, people were not really talking about slavery overtly. They, everybody has their own interests in not mentioning slavery outright. The Southerners don't want to say slavery, this is about slavery and we want to take our slaves with us. We want to have more slave holding states. They don't say it like that because they also want to win votes. But John C. Calhoun, he actually openly stated the annexation of Texas is about slavery, and slavery is not a necessary evil, but a positive good. And he really wanted slavery to spread. So he helps people who helps us, because you can see that, just lifts the lid a little bit. You can actually see that this is actually the issue of the day of that election. So there we go. He's lost, Clay loses, and Polk has a big success, and especially with the Mexican War. Okay, so we have some diagrams. I've just popped some diagrams in of the how our map develops as we go through this history. So they've just had the election 1844, 1845. Okay, they're going to do their Texas expansion like we discussed. They're still got their parallel line that they probably have in mind as well. And then now the map is going to look like this once they get a hold of Texas. So it's now a blue, all the blue is now the United States. And then some areas up the top. Places generally started off as territories, and then they would apply to become a state. So they went through a couple of steps to get there. So that's how the map develops during Polk's time. So here, they look, you could cut a long story short. The Mexican War is quite fascinating to look into how they did it, but they end up getting all the way across. So they get these territories and all the way to California. And they can also, because of the money that Mexico owed, I think how it all ended up at the end of the war, they also got this Gadsden Purchase as well, this little bit of dark blue land here. Make matters worse, so the Mexicans are very unhappy. Obviously, they didn't want to lose their territories, but they're even more horrified when they have lost their territories. They lost California, what's now called California, and gold was discovered in California. So now it's like, they're like, great, now we lost the land and now there's gold there. So it's really wealthy California, there's gold rush, and California becomes kind of key in this. They apply to become a state, and this sets us up now for the 1850 compromise. So here's a map of, in 1848, what, now the amount of territory. So you can see it's starting to look like what we now know as the United States. We've got, all those orange and green on the right. And then here we have these grey areas where they've acquired all this land, and now it's going to start, different areas will be applying to become states. What are they going to do with all these? Are they going to be slave states? Are they going to be free states? It's a big deal to them, especially as it relates to the balance of power in the government as well in the Congress. All right, so what have I got here? I'll do this bit as well here. Some quotes. So this is about Polk's successes. These are just some quotes from Wikipedia about what historians today say about Polk. This is just to hammer home how important the 1844 election was. Polk won, and Polk was a huge success in terms of this spread of territory. So virtually everyone remembers Polk and his expansionist successes. He produced a new map of the United States which fulfilled a continent-wide vision. Another historian said, to look at that map and to take in the western and southwestern expanse included in it is to see the magnitude of Polk's presidential accomplishments. another quote, Polk, like others of his time, failed to understand that sectionalism and expansion had formed a new explosive compound. So you can see, you know, they're identifying that, sort of you can see it positively, but you can also see it's setting up for an explosion. Quote 4, Polk lacked a far-seeing awareness of the problems that were bound to arise over the status of slavery in the territory acquired from Mexico. So that's just some modern views now that we have hindsight, and they're looking at Polk's role in all of that. Okay, so yeah, I'll stop screen share. We'll pop that up on the board. So what have we done here? We've got 1844, so you've got two way marks here for the, you know, first group called out 1844. So where I'll just tie them together and make it 1844 here. And we have Henry Clay versus James Polk. Henry Clay's compromises, and you could broaden that to the big party because there's so much pressure about this manifest destiny thing or whatever, and the slavery thing. They don't really have a platform. They don't have a really clear anti-slavery platform or anything like that. They lost here. The votes, the northern vote was split. It cost Henry Clay the presidency, and James Polk won. And we just read those quotes from the historians about how big a deal that was and how that's formed basically the United States to look like what it does today. So in Henry Clay's lifetime, again, we can mark him here. And I think here we were talking about the Mexican War too, and the spreading of the land. So I think I don't think I have anything to write up about that part there. Okay. Now we're at 1848. This is the next election. So you can see, so the powder keg is sort of building up in pressure here. So here we enter 1848, another important election. We have a picture there in orange there. That's the California, state of California, who was applying to join as a state. They actually didn't want to be, they didn't want to be a slave state. They wanted to be a free state. But, you know, and then the other areas between California and that, you know, so the bit in between, the bridging part in the middle, they were kind of still territories, and there was, you know, a couple of parts to that. One was above and one was below. There was just some thoughts about what they were going to do as well. So everybody wants, you know, the Southerners want slavery and the Northerners want no slaves, and that's just the debate that's going on. So we have the election. The Whigs want to run again. They want to win votes again. So they pick Zachary Taylor. He was a very famous general in the Mexican War. He was really very famous for winning so many of these battles. They pick him as a Whig candidate, and he runs, and he obviously wins. They win the election. So you have Zachary Taylor, and for vice president, that he's not a Southerner, he's a Northerner, and he's anti-slavery as well, Millard Fillmore. So they win the election. What else was I going to say about 1848? So yes. Yeah, no, that's that for now. Okay, so what ends up happening? Zachary Taylor, they win, but in 18 months later, he dies. He dies in 1850, so that's kind of like a catalyst for this situation in 1850. Millard Fillmore is going to be the one who signs the 1850 Compromise. So when we said at the beginning, who do you think is responsible for this signing in of the Fugitive Slave Act? Millard Fillmore is the name of the guy, and not especially famous name, but for us quite important. So he was a Northern anti-slavery Whig, and he signed the 1850 Compromise. So you would think it would be a Democrat from the South or something like that, or even, you know, somebody might have thought, you know, be like a slaveholding Whig or something like that. But he's anti-slavery. But he signed the compromise, and we'll talk about why he did that. But all of this is in the context of, you know, all to do with this. Ray, did you have a question? Did that just pop up?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, is that a bit like Bill Clinton signing DOMA?
I don't think it's exactly the same, because Bill Clinton signed DOMA, I think, well, I don't know whether Bill Clinton was doing that to keep the union together. I think the motives were a little different, because I think he, perhaps you could say, I guess that would be a matter of opinion. But in this case, there's real threats of secession here, like they're really real. So it seems kind of a bit more like an urgent last minute attempt to keep the union together. I'm not sure. Perhaps in, you know, he could. Probably not qualified to answer. All right, so here's a picture of 1848. Now, the reason I've got the time period for the 1850 compromise, so that election that just happened in 1848, this is when Henry Clay he's unwell. Some may remember this being explained. He's very sick. He's 70-something years old, so fairly old back then, you know, that he'd considered old. But he wants to save the Union because of this issue, that this division over the slavery in California and all of this, you know, because it's very polarized in Congress now. So Polk goes, he actually meets his friend, I think it was Webster? I think his last name is Webster. And together, him and Webster just draft up this thing. It's got 8 sections in it, and it's going to save the Union. It's going to give everybody what they want. We're going to let California do what they want. They want to be no slaves, but the other territories, will let them self-determine as well. This is quite a popular idea, that people should be able to determine their own, you know, fate or whatever. They can vote within their own territories and decide. So for the Southerners, that's supposed to be like, you know, well, we can hope that we can convince them perhaps to let us. The Southerners wanted to bring their slaves with them. You know, they wanted to move over there and bring their slaves, you know, and make wealth. It wasn't just like letting those people have their own slaves or not slaves. They actually want to make money out of this and come across. So this is the idea. So Clay's going to have this idea that they can sort of, you know, we'll let the areas, they can determine their own, you know, whether they want to be slaves or not. We're not going to let the federal government like interfere with the interstate slave trade. We're going to sort of like, we're not going to control the trade of slaves between states. And also we're going to do this Fugitive Slave Act, you know, so you might be able to convince some of those territories to be slave or not slave, you know, well, for the Southerners, you might convince them to be slave holding. But in any case, we're going to really like formally like put this Fugitive Slave Act in here and really reinforce that. So you can all be calm, all your Southerners can be pretty happy. You'll get what you want, you know, out of this Slave Act, and we're going to formalise all of this. So he goes there and he's trying to convince everybody to, you know, compromise. Let's all come together. Let's save the Union. We don't want, you know, all this secession, threats of secession have been going on over and over and over again. You know, like, let's vote this package in. He puts it in as a whole package. Of course, you have some people who want some bits and some people who want other bits. And because it's all in one package, if they don't want the whole lot, they're going to vote no. If they wanted this section but not that section, then maybe they would have voted yes to some parts. You might have actually been able to pass it through that way, but he actually presents it as just one thing. There's not enough people that like all of it because it's so polarized. Even the Southerners don't like it because there's too much to them, you know, giving away too much to the North. So it doesn't pass. Clay goes home and, you know, it looks like a miserable failure. The reason I've got the picture of Stephen Douglas down there in the bottom left corner, he's actually a Democrat, so he's not a Whig, but he can see that perhaps potentially we can save the Union if we can do this bit by bit. We can break it up into pieces and maybe we can pass it through. So between, you know, during this time period, 1848 to 1850, Stephen Douglas gets active. He, you know, chops it up into pieces. He sets up with these little kind of commissions. They go around and they try to convince everybody, look, let's all for the sake of unity, let's all agree on this. And so they vote one by one, and it ends up passing. And he had a quote at the end when the vote was going to be cast, he had a quote saying that he himself said, like, this is Clay's bill. It's basically almost exactly the same. You know, so basically gives credit to Henry Clay for it, and it passes. So that's how that ended up happening. So I just circled a couple of faces because we can see Millard Fillmore here. He's that vice president that becomes the president. So when Henry Clay is there, Millard Fillmore, who's sitting on the big chair, he's not the president yet. The president didn't want to have slavery, so he wouldn't agree to any of this. That's why when he died in 1850, Millard Fillmore goes, okay, good, I want to save the Union, I'm prepared to compromise, and so he passes it. So that's that. Okay, so to summarise that one, we have Henry Clay on the left. He wrote it. It was written by a Whig, the 1850 Compromise. On the right, Millard Fillmore, he signed it. So written by a Whig and signed by a Whig. And it was all to save the Union. And they also wanted to uphold a plain reading of the Constitution. So if you remember, there was the Fugitive Slave Clause in the Constitution from the start. They said that they wanted to uphold that. It's written there, we should abide by that, that's law. So they didn't see this need to progress or amend it or improve it. They didn't sort of look at it that way. They look at it as plain reading. So that's a mindset we're familiar with. Henry Clay died in 1852, shortly after the 1850 Compromise went through. And we just have a few quotes here about Lincoln, because this leads into Abraham Lincoln. You can see Abraham Lincoln is continuing the mindset of Henry Clay. I think I have time to get some people to read. I don't know who's everybody is here. I can see a list of participants. So I'll just open it up for anyone who would like to read, say, the first two quotes for me.
I could read those for you, Katherine, if you like.
Thanks, Lynn.
You go, Lynn.
Yes, please.
Okay. Lincoln once told a sculptor carving his likeness that he almost worshipped Henry Clay. For Lincoln, Henry Clay was the beau ideal of a statesman, a political role model to be emulated and supported.
Thank you. Okay, and would somebody like to read the next three? I wonder whether someone from Fiji is available to unmute and read. I'll give you a first go. Anyone from Fiji?
Lincoln cast his first presidential vote for Clay in 1832. In 1844, Lincoln campaigned vigorously for Clay and served as an elector for him in the state of Illinois.
I'll just do the next one if you don't mind.
On July 6, 1852, at the State House in Springfield, Lincoln delivered a stirring eulogy for his political idol, Henry Clay of Kentucky. Ooh.
Yeah, so you can see there that what Lincoln thought about Henry Clay. All right, so there's our faces again. They may be a little bit more familiar to us now that we've been through some history. So I think we should be able to recognise who most of those people are. Certainly the most important ones, obviously Henry Clay at number 2, John C. Calhoun at number 1, key here, Polk, you need to, he's from 1844. He's the one who won that election, that key election. John Tyler, the vice president that ended up raising this whole issue about Texas. Millard Fillmore, number 9, he's the one who signed the 1850 Compromise to save the Union and to preserve the plain reading of the Constitution. So there's some key names and faces there. And maybe I will close in prayer. I think for time, I did have like another board ready in case we would have to go and summarise, but I think we've done pretty well to get it all actually in the time period that we had, and I'll stop there. So I'll close with prayer. And then I will open it up for any questions. Actually, I might just, I'll finish writing on the board actually, so we can do that, and then I'll close and pray. So then opening up here. So this is 1848. And that one we had Zachary Taylor was the president, and then vice president was Millard Fillmore, and he's the one who does the signing of the thing. Okay, so he signed it. And 1848 here, when we're looking at the compromises, this is when Clay attempted it. And then 1850 is when it passed. So that's that. Okay, so you can just mark Henry Clay here, 1848, he's attempting this thing. 1850, it's his bill that passed. And then 1852 here, it's 1852, he died. Okay, so you can thread him all the way through all of those. So I'll take a photo of that and we can share that later. All right, if you would kneel with me, we can close in prayer. Dear wonderful God, we are amazed at how history repeats. We are amazed at how the waymarks are so accurate, and how through Elder Tess you've taught us how these external events really was so closely matched time-wise with the internal events that we already knew about. This revelation is so profound, and we're so thankful that you have opened this up to us. Pray that you would help us to remember some of these things, or all if we can, to remember them and have them in our minds, so that when we talk more, we can draw on it and we can really be strong on the message and have strong faith in the lines, and not doubt or waver when we're tested. Pray, Lord, that you would bless our leaders, fill them with the Holy Spirit, continue to lead and guide this movement, and please improve and chasten us so we're not be fit for heaven. We want to be suitable. We don't want to bring, we don't want to harm anybody, and we want to be righteous and to do this work faithfully. So please help us to reform and to follow the truth with humility. So we thank you for this time and for blessing our service. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.